Okay, it looks like we are back. We are live. This is the new and improved Ida edition of the Freedom Side Live. Really appreciate everybody sticking with us. Big shout out to our whole Breakthrough News team there. For those who are just joining us here on the Freedom Side Live or rejoining us, we did have some technical difficulties related to Hurricane Ida, the remnants of Hurricane Ida, who did hit New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Very serious situation. At least 24 people have died. 150,000 people without power. We also here in our studios, we're having some technical difficulties with our initial setup. So we've gone to our second setup, if you will, our alternate site. And here we are back on the Freedom Side. So I'm Eugene Puryear, one of your hosts, here with Ron Yakalik, Juan in the booth, also with us. We were all sweating bullets there for a second. But here, we've still got plenty for you here on the show. Anyone who's just tuning in on YouTube, feel free to hit the subscribe, hit that bell, share it wherever you're watching, especially because some people may be a little confused because we had to go off and on. So
I'm confused.
I'm confused.
This look is very unlike what we usually do.
Anything we say that you think is wrong, just chalk it up to
hurricane. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
Ida did this.
We want to give people a second to gather, and then we'll jump into some of our great guests. But we do want to just hop into a couple quick things real fast. Afghanistan obviously still at the top of the news in a major way. And, the media is reacting to it in many different ways. Why don't we go with the short clip first?
So it's hot boy summer in Afghanistan, and the Taliban is having the time of their life.
Wait, were you saying something, Eugene?
Play that again.
So it's hot boy summer in Afghanistan, and the Taliban is having the time of their life.
I've seen that like 8.
So it's hot boy summer in Afghanistan.
All right, I wouldn't do it again.
Who approved that? I mean,
I love it. Oh my God, it's a hot boy summer in Afghanistan. I mean, it's like what's happened in Afghanistan is obviously terrible, and that's not what we're laughing at. We're laughing at Fox News's like that. That sounded like an opening to. Let's be honest. It sounded like an opening to like a gay bar, like it's hot boy summer, like you know what I mean? Come see all the sexy, like
I don't know what it is. I don't know who's doing the writing over there at Fox. Maybe their salaries have gone down and they're just throwing out whatever.
It's hot boy summer in Afghanistan.
The thing about it is that he said it with such conviction. Like, at no point was he like, "Wait, what?" Before the show, did he raise anything? Did he not see the script? Was there no morning meeting? I don't know, but that's Fox News prime time. A little more seriously here, I think we have a real serious example of just the imperial brain rot of a huge amount of the news media. We have Richard Engel, who's I think the head of NBC News, offering some moral takes on
Here we go.
Afghanistan.
The worst capitulation of Western values in our lifetimes. You left behind. I went to Afghanistan. I arrived a couple of weeks ago. It was a republic backed by the United States, backed by the West. Now it is an emerging Islamic emirate trying to find its way.
I just want to say, okay, Western values. I mean, if you really want to talk about what Western values in Afghanistan meant, it meant propping up a corrupt government that made the Taliban look good, that killed civilians. It meant the U.S. killing civilians. I mean, what is Western? What is that? What is even talking about Western values? You're talking about
mass
20 years
killing immigrants.
Yeah, those are Western values, but also like look at the way the U.S. left. The U.S. literally on their way out, the last thing they did before leaving Afghanistan was they killed like several children. In a drone strike,
incinerated a whole family.
There's your Western values, but also like seriously, if you want to talk about a Western-backed government, take a look at the government that those Western values backed. All of the corruption that America complained, like that Biden complained about, that Americans complain about with the Afghan government, the U.S. built that. The U.S. put that into place. So you want to talk about Western values? Western values is going into a country, destroying it, and teaching whatever you put in its place how to be as corrupt as Western officials are.
Right.
That's what Western values are. So give me a freaking break. And that's coming from Richard Engel. I just want to remind people who aren't familiar with his incredible journalism in Syria. When the Syrian civil war was near the beginning of it, like when all journalists were still going in before they were getting kidnapped by, moderate rebels, Richard Engel was kidnapped by moderate rebels backed by America pretending to be a government militia.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
And he reported it wrong at first because he's such an idiot dupe of a journalist. I mean, he's not a journalist. He's a celebrity on TV. He's a millionaire who does propaganda for billionaires. Yeah. That's what he is. And that's why he's crying on his way out of Afghanistan for fake Western values.
I think so. I mean, and to be honest with you, it really just shows everything you need to know, that the vast majority of people in the U.S. wanted, have totally different views on all of these wars than the people who prop them up in the media, but that's how they do it. But yeah, I thought that is an interesting look on two angles at how ridiculous the U.S. media is, but maybe we should just advance the ball a little bit here. And of course, once again, you are watching the Freedom Side Live. This is our Hurricane Ida edition. We're in the alternate site here in terms of our look. If you're wondering why the look
is the alternate to the alternate.
This is the alternate site.
Because our main studio flooded.
This is the disaster site. Because of some flood damage here in our studio, we've had to go to a second look. But we want to move forward here. Well, no, we're waiting for our next guest, KJ. No, we're going to see if
he's on.
He is on.
I can see him.
Okay, it seems like he's on. I'm actually getting multiple different things. I'm also having people contact me asking what happened originally. I don't know why I was even entertaining that. So I think KJ is here. So we want to go ahead and bring on the journalist, scholar, and peace activist KJ No to talk a little bit about some of the U.S. propaganda as it concerns China. KJ, thank you so much for being back with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, the first issue I wanted to ask your thoughts on, KJ, is this new report, relatively new report from late last week. I believe it came out last Friday from the various U.S. intelligence agencies stating that it was essentially very almost impossible that it was a bioweapon, that is COVID-19, that China most probably did not have some form of pre-knowledge of this, and that the lab leak theory essentially cannot be confirmed at the very least. I mean, it said many other things. So, I mean, do you feel like this is a definitive end to the attempts to place the blame for COVID-19 on China, or is this just another sort of misdirection play from the U.S. government?
The results are open-ended, but so I could see this very easily restarting. Essentially, they had a choice of three things. They could have come back with the report and said, China is completely exonerated. But there's no way they could do that, although all the evidence points in that direction. The second thing they could have done is to say that, yes, the Chinese are responsible. And that would have essentially created a casus belli, a cause for war. Now, I don't think they were willing to go that far simply because there was so much pushback inside the scientific community against that. And also because, and this is the thing that they cannot avoid, is the fact that the Wuhan lab, some of its research was funded by the United States. So there's no way they can come up with that conclusion without really massaging that. Otherwise, that will blow back directly on that. So what they came back with the conclusion was that the result was inconclusive, and the failure to render a conclusion was because of China's lack of cooperation and transparency. And so once again, they're pushing the blame back on China, saying that the Chinese are deceitful and dishonest, and therefore this is why we cannot come to a full conclusion.
One of the things I want to ask you in relationship to this, KJ, is the way a lot of this is often presented, the way I saw the Washington Post, for instance, address or summarize, I should say, the government report, is to say that it essentially was saying that, well, both are probable, as if these are sort of two co-equal things of evidence. And if we can't say which one it is, but it could be either. I mean, how do you evaluate those kind of claims?
They're quite absurd. I mean, in the simplest terms, there is a high probability event, and there is an extraordinarily low probability event, and you're saying that both are equally possible. Let's think about this. Statistically, there is natural zoonotic transfer possible between billions of bats and hundreds of millions of people who routinely live, work, encounter bats. Or you could have had an accidental infection by a handful of very highly trained lab workers, all who have trained seronegative. So what are the likelihood of one being more possible than the other? I think the answer is clear there, but it's a very, very, deliberate misrepresentation of the odds, and it serves as part of this information warfare to continue to cast suspicion on China. Essentially, we're asking ourselves, what is more likely? A long duration, ongoing, high probability environment with millions of interactions, or a short duration, low probability, single event, highly unlikely, which is more probable? And I think we know the answer to that.
Mhm.
It also seems like so much of this is related to, obviously, we've talked with you before about this Cold War with China, and it's related to that, but also, when you look at how the US continues to fail to get this virus under control, whereas China has had quite the opposite outcome because it took completely different, it's really gone after dealing with this virus in a totally different way, in a very collective way, in a very centralized way, in a way the US isn't really capable of doing. It seems to me that a lot of this also has to do with not just blaming China because of this Cold War rhetoric, but also deflecting blame for what continues to be, despite the access to vaccines in America, a catastrophe of getting a lid on this virus.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. So the Chinese did something which was extremely logical, extremely scientific, extremely, essentially good public health. They tested, tracked, and created large sectors of quarantine. And this is what you do. We've known this since, the 16th century, at least, is that this is how you deal with epidemics, especially if you don't have a vaccine, which is what China had at the time. The New York Times and the US media came out and said that this was a violation of human rights. There was no way that this could work. And once having put that out into the media sphere, they shot themselves in the foot, because we know now that essentially this is the only way that you can essentially shut down transmission, especially with the variants that are happening right now. Vaccines are good, but you do need to have quarantine, you do need to have lockdowns. And by tarring that, describing that as Chinese authoritarianism, they essentially politicized something which was just simply good common sense and good public health policy. So now they want to find a way to continue to blame China. And this is one of the ways, although, as I said, it's fairly complex, because some of that blame will cycle back to the United States, simply because the US was involved in funding the lab. It was an international collaboration, and there's no reason why the Chinese would be doing bio warfare research or dual use research inside, a facility that is open and accessible to international collaboration.
Well, it seems like such an important issue, because I feel like on so many levels, and we've already mentioned them here so many times, KJ, this just deliberate misrepresentation. I mean, it feels like the same thing with the issue of Chinese, quote unquote, lack of cooperation. If you open the Global Times, you see, one or two articles every day quoting Chinese government officials saying that they're very open to the idea of looking more deeply in depth, having more international cooperation around looking into the virus. So, I mean, that in and of itself also seems like deeply pernicious, this idea that they're trying to hide something, when obviously that seems to be the exact opposite.
Yes, it is the exact opposite. The Chinese have cooperated with 3 searches, 3 inspections of their labs. It's not the first, it's not the second. This is the third one. They've opened up everything they can reasonably within the resource constraints and within the laws that they have. What some of the framing is that the researchers did not receive access to all the raw files. Well, there are 100 million cases of pneumonia in China every year, tens of thousands that were likely, and all of these would be personal protected health information in Chinese. So the fact that the Chinese didn't throw all of that at them is not some kind of conspiracy to conceal anything. It's just good science and good investigative procedure. But that is being spun. If they had given all their data, then there's no accounting for how that could have been tampered with, or perhaps they would have been accused of doing irresponsible data dump. So they can't win either way. But essentially, they said we do not want a body cavity search of our premises without reasonable cause. And this is very important. Remember, there is a very large, reliable, and accumulating body of evidence that demonstrates that China may not have been the origin of the disease. Simply the first country to discover and pull the alarm. I'm talking about September, October, November, multiple European countries with wastewater, blood samples, X-rays, antibody tests, etc. There's a large body of evidence which points out that the search for origins should be expanded.
Yeah, that's actually one aspect of that's like been so interesting to me, is the fact that so little has been this has not been discussed almost at all. I mean, I remember months ago, like more than 6 months ago, even late last year, or even before that, like you mentioned, these wastewater samples in parts of Europe, and also there was blood samples that were donated from a couple months before the first known outbreak in Wuhan took place in the US even, that showed positive cases for COVID. This has gotten almost no attention. Moreover, I mean, there's of course a lot of people in the scientific community, I think rightly, saying, well, we can't rule out that it came from a lab, right? And they're right to say that, because you can't rule it out, because really anything is possible. But then that really opens it up to, you can't just say the Wuhan lab, because it's not the only lab in the world, right, where this kind of stuff has been being researched. There's also this lab in the US that has received no scrutiny at all, of course, from the American media, but it's just as probable. I mean, it's very unlikely that it came from a lab, but if that's going to be a probability, then you have to include everything. But of course, that's received almost no attention in the US media at all.
Absolutely, yes. What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. I mean, essentially, there are at least 200 bioweapons labs associated with the United States that distributed around the world, of which at least 40 are explicitly acknowledged. And we have to ask ourselves, of course, most of the evidence points to the fact that it is not bioengineered. And all the things that you read from Nicholas Wade in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists are completely fraudulent and manufactured. The BAS has a lot of, answering to do for that. But if there is responsibility, we really have to look at all the possibilities. If it's a lab leak of some kind or another, we have to think about US labs, we have to think about UNC, we have to think about the hundreds of other labs that might be suspect. So all of this speaks to the fact that, this is continually and deliberately being focused on China. And I think that speaks to the fact that even when this original investigation was called, the focus was only on China. It engaged a panel of the intelligence community, not a panel of scientists. And this is scientific work. You need scientists to do the investigation, not intelligence agencies. They're no more likely to come up with the origin of COVID than they are likely to come up with the cause or the solution to cancer. And certainly not in 90 days. With an arbitrary timeline of 90 days, you're not going to get any answers.
Yeah. No, I think that's extraordinarily important. And I mean, it just feels like this is coming, or really just even this maybe 10-day period, the level of just overall propaganda around China has gotten so much more significant. I mean, we've had a controversy over allegedly the banning of video games in China, which certainly doesn't seem to be the whole story.
The New York Times correspondent is very, very, very afraid about the banning of children playing video games all day long. Apparently, that's like a huge
there's also
infringement.
An issue over fan culture and all these other things. Basically, everything good and fun is being banned in China. Seems to be the nature of
They're going after big tech billionaires. We should be very scared.
Yes. I mean, it does seem like such a concentrated funnel of information that is just constantly shoved down people's throats, KJ. And there's no real second guessing it or other sort of American media resources that are saying something different. And it becomes quite an echo chamber.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, clearly China is cracking down on video games. They have restricted children to 3 hours a week. This is because they have over 150 million kids playing video games, and many of them are getting addicted. And so they're taking what I consider to be good measures. I think many people are in favor of it. Certainly in Silicon Valley, most of the Silicon Valley moguls prevent their kids from having any contact with tech until they're much, much older. So, I think these are good measures, but they're all being spun in a very, noxious and, poisonous way. Same thing about the celebrity culture crackdown in China, which is also happening. This is because celebrities are visiting the Yasukuni shrine. This is like the Japanese Nazi shrine, or they're engaging in mass rape, or they're manipulating their fans into giving them money, etc. These are things that I think the Chinese government, has a right to regulate, and it's their country, it's their internet environment, and they have a legitimate cause to regulate these things. I think many people, even here, would agree with some of those things, but of course, it's always spun as China evil, China bad.
I mean, even poverty elimination in China is spun in the US media as something negative. I remember an LA Times article from recent years going after the poverty alleviation program in China. Again, China managed to lift over 800 million people out of extreme poverty, which is a huge accomplishment. Like, it hasn't been done in human history, right? And I remember seeing an LA Times article that was complaining about the fact that some people from a very rural village that had like zero infrastructure were relocated to new houses. The government built them. And I was like, I don't understand what the problem is. But apparently that's a very negative thing. Apparently eliminating extreme poverty is scary and authoritarian somehow.
Yes, they're only doing it because they're trying to buy legitimacy. If only all governments tried to buy legitimacy in that fashion. Last time I heard, it's 850 million, the end of extreme poverty, which people have said was not possible. The poor will always be with us. That's not the case. And it shows how much of a people-centered development the Chinese government is aiming for.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate you as always, KJ. Obviously, all of this is, I think, to many people very confusing. So thanks for giving us some time and helping us sort through it here. KJ No, among other things, an organizer with Pivot to Peace. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, the pleasure was all ours. And for those who are just joining us, our look is a little different. This is the beta edition, the alternate side edition, the Hurricane
I think
Ida
I saw someone in the comments say that I look like I'm in a hospital room.
Well, that's pretty much where we are.
I apologize. I am in a hotel room, but it looked on the different. Obviously, we're using a different platform than usual because we had some flood damage in the studio in New York from Hurricane Ida. I'm, of course, coming remotely on our different platform. You would not see the whole room
Yeah.
So I apologize for my hospital-looking background.
I actually wish we had gone with just like all red lights behind me, like we're really in some sort of like disaster.
Yeah, like you're
headquarters
hiding
type
underground.
situation.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, as Ronnie said, we did have some technical difficulties because of Hurricane Ida. So we went to the alternate site beta version, but we still have Juan in the booth, as you can see there. So it's not that alternate. But welcome. Happy to have you here. Of course, make sure you share this stream so that whoever's following you can follow us. If you're watching on YouTube, definitely subscribe, hit that bell. And if you so choose, you can put some money into the super chat, and our censor, Rania Kalik, will look at it. And someone want to take it? Go ahead, Juan. You brought it up.
Yeah, and if you want to, help us recover from water damage, you can go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news. Anything would help. Our sound sounded horrible. We don't know what the damage actually did yet. We thought everything was going to be fine when we came in, but
we discovered it was not. But we're still here. Alternate site. Can't take us down.
Still here.
This
We
is
all
like,
don't. The second you say that, Eugene, you
Fallout
can't
shelter.
say you can't take us down, because the second you say that, it's gonna get something bad is gonna happen.
it's just like
I'm not gonna.
I know it's not how things work, but
the doors blow in.
Well, let's.
The doors is blowing.
Yeah. Wow.
It's weird not seeing. By the way, it's weird not seeing Juan behind glass.
Oh yeah. I mean,
it was a different situation. There's some glass in front of him. He is still in a
That's
booth,
true.
but it's an open air booth.
it's
Yeah.
an
Climb out if he
Oh
wants.
God, it does not
open air
sound better
booth.
than before.
it's an open air booth.
Doesn't that sound better? That seems
Still sounds like we're holding Juan hostage in a booth.
Well, where are you right now? In some sort of. Let's start.
All right. Moving
We're just
on.
trying to have a little bit of fun here, listeners. Obviously, we were, at least Juan and I, hit with this terrible situation, this Hurricane Ida in New York. Rania, I mean, you're not in Beirut, but we all have to have a little disaster humor just because it actually is affecting.
That's the only way to
lives,
deal.
It is very serious.
Whenever it rains like this, it makes me think of The Day After Tomorrow. You know that movie with
Of course I know.
with Jake
Yeah.
Gyllenhaal.
Everything about that. And what's his name is his dad, and I just love when he calls. He's like, "Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you." Is it Dennis Quaid? No.
Yeah, is it? I think it's Dennis Quaid.
It's somebody of that ilk for sure. Honestly, great movie.
Guys, someone in the comments. Sorry, because I can see, because we're using a different platform. I can see the
Please.
comments. I usually can't. Someone wrote a hashtag free Juan.
It says keep Juan
Keep
free.
Juan free.
Yeah, they couldn't leave me in the basement because it was raining.
Honestly, since we're in our site B, I could actually go over and show you one in real time. But
Don't
I'm not
do
gonna
it.
do that. I can't reveal all of our secrets.
Don't break
Can't
the
reveal
fourth
all of our
wall.
secrets.
I like that Eugene is like genuinely concerned that people are going to start thinking we're holding Juan hostage.
This is how rumors start.
Yes.
Marnia.
The internet is powerful. Well, let's move to another very important issue. That is this, tsunami of evictions that is facing people here in the United States. I believe as many as 15 million people facing eviction after the CDC moratorium on evictions expired at the national level. Some things have happened on the state level, but many millions of people still facing eviction. And of course, whatever the laws are, there are many people who still end up evicted because not every landlord, believe it or not, is following the law. But we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show here by Elizabeth Blaney, who is a member of Union de Vecinos, which is the eastside chapter of the LA Tenants Union. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm glad to see that you guys are safe with all the impacts and the weather challenges that you're going through. We got the fires over here, so I really was kind of hoping some of that hurricane could come over to us. But I'm glad you guys are safe and that the program will still be able to go on. So that's great.
No, we really are. And both ends here of the disaster spectrum represented in this conversation, but also really appreciate you joining us. I'm curious, Elizabeth, how you are looking at this moment at the end of the CDC moratorium. What are tenants really facing? What are some of the things that you are seeing in terms of those that you're working with and what people are faced with and fearing?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's not surprising that the Supreme Court ruled the way they did. It just continues the long history of torture that the United States has, from what the United States does to kids at the border, to the detention center, to our prisons. And we see eviction as violent and as a form of torture. It's all about making somebody suffer, making a tenant, feel punished because they're not doing, in order to get them to do something that the landlord wants them to do. And so really we have seen, I mean, if you look, evictions have continued, illegal evictions have continued throughout the entire pandemic. We here in Los Angeles in particular with the LA Tenants Union, we've got 15 chapters as part of the LA Tenants Union, and we all each chapter has a rapid response network. You can't quite see my shirt, but a lot of us have these bolt cutters that are here in our cars, because what we have been doing has been going in and then reclaiming those apartments. So, I was working with one of the tenants who's a mariachi. While he went to work, the landlord came in, stole his instruments, changed the locks on his door, put up a new metal door, locked the building. And so he's a member of the tenants union. So he called us, instead of calling the police. Don't call the police. They're always going to take the landlord side. Call your tenants, call your neighbors. That's the army that you want to defend you in this. So we went out there, took our bolt cutters, took our saws, took down the door, replaced the locks, reclaimed his space, got his instruments back. And that's a lot of what's happening in Los Angeles. And not only in Los Angeles, we work with an autonomous tenant union network where we're hearing stories out of Chicago and San Francisco who are doing the similar type of thing of reclaiming and taking back the home. So the flood, because this is going to be a very long process. It's not like just one big wave comes and then it calms down. This is going to be months and months and months of continual evictions with this ban. And I think there's only 4 or 5 states. I mean, New York just extended theirs till January. California, ours ends on September 30th. I know New Mexico has one in place. New Jersey has one in place, but most states do not. And so it's going to be very problematic, but a lot of organizing on the ground for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the things that a lot of people may wonder when they hear about this is what is going on with all this money that was allegedly appropriated by the government. You're constantly reading they sent $40-some billion, and it's like, well, how could these two things be coexisting at the same time? I mean, what are you seeing and hearing in terms of California and other parts of the country as to what is going on with this alleged rent relief?
Well, again, this is also just the United States passing the buck and all the different government agencies pointing the finger and passing it on to somebody else. So with this ban, what did the Supreme Court do? Oh, they just passed it on down to the lower courts to have to deal with. And you're going to have a bunch of frivolous cases by landlords because the tenants are going to come in and say, hey, I applied to the state. So why are you going forward with this eviction? But a lot of landlords are continuing to do that because most tenants don't know their rights, don't know they can use that as a defense, self-evict out of fear. And then what does that do? You create more homelessness. So now that passes the buck on to the police department, to county homeless services, to the health system. I mean, it's this continual thing. And then what the feds did by just distributing the money to the states, they washed their hands of it. And the states, as individualistic as they are, have created very bureaucratic and burdensome processes to be able to get those funds. And, in California specifically, we've only given out 20% of the funding. I think New York is at 7%. Florida is at 3%. I mean, ridiculously low. And this is money that came in March. And 5-6 months later, still haven't gotten it out. And so I specifically in the city of LA thought they were like, God, and we're going to be able to do this better. So they opted out of the state's program, only opened up the application process for the month of April. And so no tenants from May through now have been able to apply for the rent debt. And what had happened last week, because of a lot of organizing on the ground by folks here in LA, were able to put enough pressure on them to reopen the process. And they just admitted, hey, we got way more applications than funding. We couldn't do this right. We're bumping it back to the state. So everybody's got to reapply. Everybody who submitted it have to reapply. But it also, the good thing is that now those tenants who couldn't get in because they didn't know about it in April are now applying. But there's no way the state is going to be able to process all these applications by September 30th when our eviction moratorium ends. So there's a lot of pressure on the state to be able to extend that. But we also got the recall going on. So one of the crazies that are running when, they'll veto anything that the legislator may do and won't let it go. So, but there's still a lot of good organizing on the ground, though, that's going to keep fighting for it.
Yeah, it's good. It's interesting you mentioned the amount of the percentage that has been spent, because I think I saw it was reported this past week, or maybe even last week, that something like 79% or 80% or something, that's a rough number. It was something around that number. 80% of funds that the federal government gave to all these states to be used to help with the eviction moratorium hadn't even been dispersed. No. So what happened to all this money? It's just sitting in states and cities and municipalities. Like, what happened to all this money?
They're just sitting. It's just sitting there. Even when the city of LA had to do their redistribution, they hadn't spent it, in terms of, it's not like they spent it somewhere else and that's why it hasn't been distributed. There's a lot of incompetency. There's a lot of just the bureaucracy of getting through the application and reviewing people's documents that they had to upload to verify those amounts. Just incredibly slow, not enough staff to do it, lots of hoops to go through. A lot of the process is online, and many of the people in need don't have access to be able to, let alone just to apply online. But now you got to scan documents, scan your tax returns, scan your rental contracts, and upload that. It's very, it's a much more complicated process. And they've just got thousands and thousands and thousands of applications. So they didn't roll this out very well. That's a lot of what the backlog is. But, if they don't spend it by a certain date, I can't remember what the date is, that it goes back to the feds. What we saw in a frenzy in December, because the city couldn't, there was some other minimal, you can get $2,000 a month kind of bull crap kind of rent relief that did nothing for the $15,000 debt for a lot of tenants. And at the end, they were so rushed, they were just running the checks out, just writing them out to the tenants so that before the money had to go back. So there's a lot of incompetency that's going on the city and state level.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that, and you've already spoken to this, but I mean, it really does underscore the issue of organization, because it seems like this is multi-tier. Like, if you are a tenant who is facing eviction, or, the neighbor of someone, it's not just going to rent court. It's not just, defending against evictions. It's not just advocating for laws. I mean, it seems like there's almost no way that an individual can even act in that sense in enough ways to protect themselves. I'm rambling now, but it really just, everything you're saying does really underscore for me the sort of collective element of tenants as a unit really in this fight.
Which has been really important to this. I mean, I think there needs to be a shout out to many of the national movements that made this happen in terms of getting even funds to cancel the rent. We had LA Tenants Union in LA doing a rent strike, Tenants Union in Chicago and New York as well supporting that, the PSL with their national cancel the rent program. All of that kind of pressure really finally convinced the feds to do more than this piddly $2,000, $3,000, amount, and to really pay off, the rent debt. Of course, it got a little bit convoluted, because really, what is this about? This is really about making landlords whole. In California, it's 100% of the rent debt for landlords. And what is this? This is passive income. This is income to the landlord, where they sit back, bet on the market, and it's passive income. So it's income to them to have this. Yes, the debt for tenants is no longer there, but it's not income to the tenants to be able to continue to survive. And so, everything is in the hand of the landlord. If the landlord decides to accept it, if the landlord, wants to participate in the program, everything is still heavily directed around, let's make sure we protect the property rights of the landlord, the income stream, this passive income stream of the landlord. And so it's kind of problematic in that, which is part of the reason why there's also a delay. So this, tenants having to really be organized in fighting, organizing tenant associations, in relying. I have buildings that are working together, that are helping each other fill out the application process, those who've access to internet helping those who don't. But it is requiring a lot of organization on the ground to get the applications in, to fight against harassment that is happening at the same time. That, you know, the landlords are like, oh, I need the money. And we're like, well, go apply. Why are you coming at? Just go fill out the application and say you want it. And then they don't. Some of them don't. And that's really a business decision, because they figure, you know, I'm going to forward with the application, with the eviction process. Yeah, I won't get the rent debt necessarily. I'll take them to small claims court. Maybe I'll get something. But the, you know, doubling and tripling of rents, I'm not sure how it is in New York, but it is double and tripling rent increases here when somebody moves out. So now they have much higher guaranteed rent coming in. It's a way, you know, doing this vacancy. There's no vacancy decontrol in California. So now long term, they have a much higher income stream than just the debt. So there's all these strategies that the tenants have to use and maneuver to be able to stay in their homes.
You know, one thing I also wanted to ask that, you know, to speak to that is, you know, conditions, even if you're able to stay in this issue of deferred maintenance. I was reading a study out of the Joint Center for Housing on Harvard the other day about there's like 80% of landlords are saying they're deferring maintenance. Now, of course, I'm sure, you know, if I asked them, you know, on camera, they would all say, oh, well, when we get the money, we're going to go back and fix things. But I mean, it also seems like that's an opportunity for a lot of price gouging against tenants, or at the very least, just a degraded standard of living where it's like, well, listen, we let you stay, you know, and whatever, and they just never go back and fix the stuff. They just pocket the money. I mean, is that something you're seeing or concerned about, or?
Most definitely. That has been a very big problem here during the pandemic. And one of the solutions that tenants have been coming up with around that is they're doing the repairs themselves collectively. So, hey, let's work on, for example, you know, Isabel's unit and help her with her shower. And now we're going to move to Anne's unit and we're going to fix the stairs. So there's a lot of like these little repair teams that are being filled with people having different levels of skills coming together. Yeah, it's a landlord's responsibility, but it's our home and we're going to fight for it. And we're not going to let the landlord use this as a way to wear us down where we don't want to live in these conditions anymore and just move out. We're not going to do that. And we're seeing tenants take on a lot more challenging and aggressive behavior than we did before COVID. You know, some of this reclaiming, staying in place when the sheriff comes, people weren't quite ready to do that before COVID. But now it's like, oh no, I don't care. I've got nothing else to lose. I'm going to stay put. I'm going to take that risk. And they're winning. And then as people are sharing those stories, people are like, oh, if you did that, I can do that. Let's do that in my building. And so we're seeing a lot of that happening in our different chapters here in Los Angeles. It's very powerful. And it's a good foundation for when eviction moratorium gets lifted, to even do more of that and be more ready to do that in the months to come.
Well, maybe just final question, maybe just to sort of double down on that. I mean, it seems like it is a crisis in many ways, but that potentially could be a transformative moment for how we're addressing issues of housing here in the U.S.
Most definitely. I mean, I think people, even amongst our members, are really raising the question of why pay rent? You know, people who have been on the rent strike, people who've gotten, I mean, the tenants have received in the letters from landlords, you know, you need to pay me rent, your rent is late, and here's a copy of the Juan ads, go get a job. It's just like, in one case, what we did is then we sent it back to them and said, why don't you go get a job? Why do I have to go work so that you can live? You already have your house. And so people are really now thinking, why pay rent? Why are rents so tied to this? You know, it should be decommodified. It's a basic thing I need to live. And, you know, we had the opportunity to participate in the Congress in Venezuela, and people sharing their stories there. They have an anti-eviction law for the entire country that they won in 2019. And so hearing about that victory has been a motivator and very transformative for some of our neighborhood committees and building associations here in LA. It's like, they can't be evicted. That's real. That's something that we can really think about. Of course, the material conditions are different, but it gave people hope in terms of being able to move forward and continue the struggle.
Absolutely. Well, Elizabeth Blaney from Union de Vecinos, the East Side local of the LA Tenants Union, really appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you both, and stay dry.
Thank you so much. It certainly was our pleasure. And Rania, I think it's, a really good way to end that segment. I mean, you hear so many negative things about all of this, but to hear that there's a lot of, resistance coming in, that people are actually going into their homes and fighting back and not allowing themselves to be displaced. That story about that mariachi, really fantastic. In so many different levels. And again, this is the beta version of the Freedom Side Live. If you just joined us, Juan in the booth also with us as well. We had some hurricane damage, so we are at the alternate site. We are in the FEMA site, if you will. It's not a FEMA site, it's actually the same building, but I'm trying to, what is some sort of disaster control or something? I don't know. That's what I'm going for. That's the vibe I'm going for here.
So I just want to say, as the appointed censor of the super chat comments, we did have a super chat, and I love this comment. You're gonna love it too, Eugene. Eugene hasn't seen it. We gotta. Can we put it on screen? Is it okay if I put it on screen? I'm gonna put it on the screen. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Here, I'm gonna do it. So Sadhu Syrup C, a great name, who threw us some money in the super chat, says, put this towards a nicer cage or booth for one. So there you have it. Thank you so much. And for those who are watching, who maybe didn't hear before, if you do throw money in the super chat, and I approve of your comment, we will read it on air. And of course, we're using a different platform than usual, only for this week, because we had some water damage to our equipment in New York, where Juan is in his booth, not too far away from Eugene. So we can put the super
chat. He can walk out at any time. There's a door. It's wide open.
That's what Eugene says. But I can neither confirm or deny this because I am not there to see for myself. I will take Eugene's word, but it's his word. So that's all I'm saying.
Wow. Wow, that was quite a shot. That was like a kidney punch. I did want to mention, so I got a haircut yesterday, and while I was at the barbershop, like the talk about evictions was something that was like what people were talking about. And like I remember one of the barbers was saying, like, oh, we're idiots as humans. We're idiots. We're the only animal that pays to live on the earth, right? And then, but that's what started the conversation.
Thank you, capitalism.
Conversation. Yep.
Yeah.
And but like that same person ended up saying, like, capitalism has us stuck because we shouldn't be paying for rent.
Right.
I mean, and it's not because of it's not like only during COVID. It's not only when we have to be sheltered in place. Like something like a place to live should be guaranteed. A society that has so much money and isn't able to guarantee that, even during a pandemic, is not a society that is for the people. So
there are more empty dwellings than homeless people.
Yeah, in New York, right? In New York, which is crazy to think of, right? We have a lot of these high rises in Midtown, in Queens. And Queens is ridiculous because it's like on the other side of the bridge from like the largest projects, right?
Yeah.
That have been under-maintained by the city. But then you have these huge high rises, some of them with 60% vacancy, some of them with 80% vacancy. And like even the ones that are owned are like investments, right?
Yes.
Are investments where people only really live in them 2 months out of the year. But there's no regulation on that, right? There's no regulation on that. And people are living in horrible conditions. And like she said, you can't call the police on your landlord, but who's going to be the one kicking you out when you miss a month or two? Or if you miss 6 months because there's a pandemic and you lose your job.
Right. Now, I think it's super important. It's critically important. And it's important for people to know what you just said there, Juan. I mean, that's how housing finance works. I mean, people put these in as investments. If you're going to invest in it, you want to know, well, what's everyone else getting in the area around you? And so they pitch these giant buildings where they'll tell people, well, look, we only need to fill up 30% and we'll charge people these super high rents. And then you're going to be able to make your return stably for 30 years. And if something happens, then we'll fill up 40%. And if something else happens, we'll fill up 50%. But basically giving themselves the option to keep the maximum number of units empty and raise the prices on the ones that are there to create essentially an artificial shortage. I mean, at any given time, there's just several 100,000 homeless people in America. And at any given time, there is a few million empty dwellings. Business Insider actually once had an article about this where they were like, why it's an illusion that there are more empty dwellings than homeless people. And I remember thinking like, oh, okay, well, maybe I was wrong. But their answer was, well, listen, people own these dwellings. And so you can't just put people in them. So yes, technically there are millions more empty homes than homeless people, but you can't just open them up because how are people going to get paid? And it's like everything you say about capitalism, it does have us stuck. Nothing is done to help people. It's done to make money. If it fills a need, it's incidental.
And in fact, in New York City, in New York City, like the city's literally giving like publicly owned land away to developers for like $1, for like dollars. They're giving up publicly owned land to private developers that are then like honestly destroying community, right?
Yeah.
They're destroying community because when they create these new high rises, when they create these luxury condos, like the people that are in the community can't afford them, right?
Yeah. It's the same in DC, by the way, with the developers buying the land for like $1. And I just want to add one more thing before we move on from this is what gets me about the US thinking it's this bastion of freedom and everybody thinks that they're so free and they have so many rights just because they can vote. Like housing should be a basic right. Right. It should be a right, like not some sort of privilege that only people who like work 3 jobs can maybe afford. It should be a right, and it is a right in socialist countries like Cuba, with a place that we call authoritarian. But I would argue that what's actually authoritarian is people living in fear of being homeless or actually being homeless or the threat of being evicted because of this awful dystopian situation that we've created in America.
No, I think that is very, very true. And I agree with you 100% on that. And I think that this is obviously a critically important issue and one we're going to continue to cover. But now we want to turn the page to Aurora, Colorado. Many people know that Elijah McClain was brutally murdered by the police there in Aurora, Colorado. And there's some, I guess, relatively good news. Obviously, nothing can bring back his life, but the officers who murdered him now finally are being held to some level of account. We're very happy to have with us Lillian House, who's an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation in Denver, who knows this case very well. Lillian, thank you so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, the pleasure is all ours. And just real quick, Lillian, for those who maybe haven't seen, what is going on right now in this stage as it concerns the police officers who murdered Elijah McClain?
Well, we learned yesterday morning that the state's investigation, which had gone to a grand jury, finally returned with its results, and it came back with an indictment on 32 counts against all 3 officers who murdered Elijah McClain and the 2 paramedics involved, including for each of them a count of manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. It is a huge victory for the movement here. We've been waiting 2 years for this.
I mean, it really is massive. I mean, it seemed like they were doing everything possible to avoid it. I apologize to take a step back here, but maybe I buried the lead a little bit. I mean, maybe for those who don't know the full story, I mean, so many of us have heard about Elijah McClain. If you could just say briefly, what took place and how did he lose his life?
Yeah, Elijah McClain was a 23-year-old Black man living in Aurora, Colorado. Oh, have you lost me? My screen is
we got you.
No. We got you.
My screen refreshed. Elijah McClain was a young man who was living in Aurora. He went to the convenience store to get tea for himself and his cousin. He was listening to music on his headphones, dancing as he was walking home in his own neighborhood, when Aurora police rolled up on him and within seconds of encountering him, treated him as a criminal, put their hands on him, and actually used multiple chokeholds to put him on the ground, where they brutally suffocated and beat him, and then worked with paramedics who came onto the site to administer an enormous dose of ketamine, which is a tranquilizer, to Elijah, who, they weren't satisfied with his full restraint with multiple officers on top of him. They wanted him to basically completely stop moving, which of course he did. And it stopped his heart, and he died in the hospital several days later. And initially, the district attorney in Aurora said, "Oh, there's nothing here. We can't bring any charges. He died of probably natural causes," is what he said. And to the public, that was just so completely absurd. It was very evident what happened to Elijah was murder. And so it has been a really fierce and prolonged struggle here over the last 2 years to get justice in this case.
And what do you
And can
think?
you?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, can you just very briefly also, for those who aren't familiar or maybe don't know about your case, in addition to these couple of years of activists like yourself and others pushing for accountability and not getting any until now, you activists like you, organizers, were actually persecuted during this time. Can you just give a brief overview of what happened with that?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, just for a little background, Denver and Aurora had some protests coming out of, after the murder of George Floyd. There was, eruptions here, like pretty much everywhere else in the country. But we had this local case, Elijah McClain, which was really outrageous and had not seen justice, and it was very much at the forefront of the community's mind. And so the protests here took on a really intensified state at that point. I mean, I've been an organizer in this case since 2 years ago when Elijah was murdered, but it was really pretty small movement until, this whole country was suddenly tuned into this very serious issue of police brutality. And I think people decided enough is enough. And there were massive protests. Myself, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, other community organizers, we led massive protests for months that were really historic for Aurora. I mean, Aurora has never had a protest movement really of any real magnitude. And this was getting international press coverage with thousands of people shutting down highways, surrounding one of the police stations with a sit-in, these just really massive actions that continued for months and months. And I think, the Aurora Police Department hadn't ever seen anything like this. They wanted it to stop. And myself and other very visible lead organizers were actually last September, so almost a year ago today, were arrested in a very, high-profile, dramatic series of arrests, truly a raid. It involved tanks and multiple police departments, and we were taken to jail where we were held for 8 days. 3 of us were held for 8 days, myself, Joel Northam, Eliza Lucero, and charged with just an incredible list of charges, actually far heavier than these cops are getting now. But we had kidnapping charges for holding a sit-in. We were facing up to 48 years in prison. So, since that time, this case it's so absurd. It's almost entirely unraveled. We're still fighting a number of misdemeanor charges, but it's really become clear that they have absolutely nothing to stand on with the charges that they've hit us with.
I mean, all in all, it seems like, something of a 180. I mean, from, total impunity for the police and really a reign of terror against those who were standing up against policing, that now they are on the back foot. I mean, what are some of the things you're expecting going forward, Lillian? I mean, now, obviously, there has been an indictment. I think many people around the country and around the world very gratified to see that. But I assume it doesn't end here. Obviously, there's a whole process that has to play out.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think that the key thing that everybody here understands is that there was going to be nothing done in this case. I mean, these cops fully thought they were going to walk away free and keep living on the people's dollar as, quote unquote, public servants. But, they thought they'd keep their jobs on the police department and everything. The only thing that's changed that is the movement, is the public pressure and, the relentless mobilization. And so that needs to continue, because these charges, while this is a major step forward, they're not convictions yet. And we need to make sure that these are convictions. So we are still remaining vigilant. We are ready to mobilize. And I think that, even beyond this case, the Aurora Police Department, I think they're on notice that things are different now in Aurora, and the people here have really seen what taking power into our own hands over things that cannot be tolerated can really achieve. And so this has been a major milestone for this city, for this state. And I think things are, they're not done here. We want to see real accountability, real safety, real security for our communities, which means, more than just putting these officers behind bars.
Mm-hmm. Well, Lillian, really appreciate you joining us here, giving us some of your time, helping us sort through all of these important issues. And of course, we'll continue to cover all of this. But thanks again for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me.
The pleasure's all ours. Well, yeah, I mean, we'll have to see what happens here, with these individuals. Let's not forget the other 3 cops who were fired, for mocking the murder of Elijah McClain and taking a photo and other things like that. Just rotten to the core. I mean, this is why I actually like the phrase "a few bad apples," because people say it as if it means like the opposite of the rest of the phrase. I think any of us who know it, a few bad apples spoil the whole bunch. It's rotten to the core, and I think it's just so disgusting. But fantastic to see a big turnaround in terms of them not being able, at least hopefully not being able to get away from this scot-free. So we'll have to see, and we'll have to continue to watch. And again, you are watching the Freedom Side. I'm Eugene Pergier. I'm here with Rania Khalek. We're in our alternate site location here. We had a little hurricane damage as well. And I just want to also note the death toll, unfortunately, here across New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania from Hurricane Ida has just increased. Now 28 people dead, including a 2-year-old child, 150,000 people without power across the 3 states. And, still a lot, draining away in terms of water and debris being cleared away. So we don't know what the full impact is going to be, but we'll keep updating you here. We are coming to you from a slightly different setup than we normally do, specifically because we did also have some damage here to our studio that we're still sorting out. But happy to have you with us here. Happy to have you share the stream wherever you're watching so people who are following you can follow us, and certainly very happy to have everyone who is participating already, watching, chatting, giving us super chats. You can put some money in the super chat, and if our censor, Rania Khalek, determines it gets read out, your comments will be read live on air. But go ahead, Rania.
Well, there was a super chat, and I thought it was funny.
Well, let's do
Martin Hernandez. I'm not going to put it. Well, Martin Hernandez, I appreciate that Martin Hernandez used a curse word, but used asterisks.
Nice.
So didn't write it out. But Martin said FEMA, and then basically what FEMA stands for. And it's F every melanated anybody. I can't argue with that.
Listen,
right?
I dealt with FEMA after Hurricane Katrina. I can tell you it was wild, some of the things they do. Juan, real quick, it's you. What's up?
No, I just that was a good comment. That was a good comment.
Just like the comment. Yeah. Okay, well, we all like it. Shout out to Martin Hernandez or Martin Hernandez. Sorry, we need to get some clarification on that, but you're here with us every week, so shout out to you. Appreciate your diligent watching. Well, we want to turn to another huge, critically important issue. That's what's going on with the woman's right to choose, certainly in Texas, but with implications for the entire United States. We're very, very honored to be joined here by Jessica Mason Pieklo, who is a senior vice president and executive editor with Rewire. Jessica, thank you so much for being with us here on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. And it's been a little while, Eugene. We haven't spoken a little bit.
It has been some time. It's definitely my pleasure to be back with you. I'm very sorry that it took this level of a crisis to bring us together, but here we are. And I am certainly looking forward to hear you help us cut through the weeds on some of this.
Yeah.
So I think, unfortunately, for a lot of people, this is the first time they're hearing anything about Texas, anything about what's going on. They're just hearing the Texas abortion ban is upheld. So real quick, if you could just capsule view, what is the Texas law at issue here?
Yeah, so thank you. This literally came out of nowhere, even for those of us who do this for our living day to day. So the Texas law at issue is nefarious. It is unlike anything that we have seen in this space before. So I'm going to talk first about the parts that are familiar, and then I'm going to talk about the parts that are unfamiliar. The parts that are familiar are this gestational ban. So the Texas law attempts to ban abortion as soon as a fetal heartbeat is detected, and that's about 6 weeks. So that's why you're seeing in media reports that this is a 6-week ban, because generally speaking in medicine, that's when fetal heart tones are detected. So 6 weeks in pregnancy is also, if you are a person who menstruates and with a regular cycle, about 2 weeks after a missed period. So this is an extraordinarily tight time frame. Within that 6-week ban, there is no exception for pregnancies due to rape or incest. And the exception for the health of the pregnant person is exceptionally narrow and has really high reporting requirements for the physician, who effectively would have to make that decision as soon as there's a heart tone. So that is the part it's bad. It's blatantly unconstitutional. But from the anti-choice community, those are things that we have seen before. What's different is what allowed the Supreme Court to do what it did this week and let the case take effect. So what this law has is an enforcement mechanism that effectively shops it out to third parties. So normally state attorney generals, right? The state of Texas would be the folks who would be enforcing this ban. Lawmakers know that that is a way to get the law blocked across the board. So they outsourced it to individuals. You may hear this as referred to as abortion vigilantes or abortion bounty hunters. That's exactly what this is. For anybody who successfully turns in someone who is in violation of this law, so a provider or somebody who is aiding and abetting. So are you an abortion fund? Are you an Uber driver who drove someone to their appointment? You are now in the hook of this. For $10,000, you can get a reward to successfully turn folks in. And if you try to challenge this law, so if you are an abortion provider, for example, who wants to challenge this and you lose part of your challenge, not all of it, just part of it, like one claim, you make one like fraud claim, let's say, and the court doesn't agree with that, you are responsible for the entirety of the other side's legal fees. So that is huge. That's going to, disincentivize people from challenging laws and enforcing and vindicating their constitutional rights. And frankly, we need to call it what it is. It's a grift by the evangelical right to really try and use a health crisis as a way to line their pockets.
Wow. I mean,
Jesus.
just on every level, I mean, it's so callous. It's almost unbelievable. And it's gone into effect, voted in by the Texas state legislature. I know they were all gloating about how they had the most conservative session ever. And this was one of the centerpieces of that legislative session. So, it's come before the courts, I know, in a couple different ways. But explain to us what exactly happened with the Supreme Court that has basically essentially created a maybe open-ended ban on abortion in Texas based on the status, I guess, of other legal cases?
Yeah. So what happened with this is really wild. So Texas lawmakers passed this bill in May. It is bizarre that we have a Supreme Court decision like this. That is so fast. Okay. So the lawmakers passed this in May. Advocates sued immediately to block it, and the lower court does what it does and scheduled it for a hearing. All of this is routine. Nothing at this point should set off any alarm bells. Right before that hearing is supposed to take effect, so that hearing was supposed to happen Monday. It would have been the first time that any court anywhere in Texas had a chance to hear opening arguments against this law, and frankly, to give the state of Texas an opportunity to defend the law on the merits. That hearing got canceled by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in a Sunday order that effectively is an administrative stay. So that is the appellate court coming in and putting its thumb on the scales and pausing the underlying litigation. That's what sparked the ability to go to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court ruled on this on the shadow docket. I'm sure you folks have talked about the shadow docket here before. That's where the court does the work that it doesn't want the rest of us to see. And that's exactly what they did. First, by not issuing any order when the law was set to take effect. So September 1st at midnight was when this law was set to take effect. And the Supreme Court just sat on its hands and sat on its hands. And then last night issued an order with the conservatives with one paragraph that was effectively like the shruggy guy emoji going, I don't know, seems pretty confusing. We should let it take effect while Texas figures it out. And then here we are.
Wow. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna make a comment, then I had a quick question, but I just want to remind everybody this is happening at a time when Republicans are going bananas about Afghanistan and journalists are weeping about the betrayal of Western values. And then here you have, like the Christian Taliban taking over Texas. I mean, it's just insane what you're saying, but the Supreme Court, the morality police of it. I mean, seriously, it's like you have morality police. It's like the religious police are going to be running around deputized by the state. It's insane.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess my question is, now that the Supreme Court has made this crazy ruling, what happens next? I mean, can this still be challenged?
It
Or
can
is that,
still
is
be
that the end
challenged.
of it? Okay.
Yeah, so it's not the end of it. There are a couple different pathways. But the thing that is really frustrating and really dangerous about what the Supreme Court did is by letting it take effect, it is a functional reversal of Roe versus Wade. And you're going to hear other legal journalists say, no, it's not really that bad. They didn't actually overturn Roe versus Wade. And we need to address this nonsense head on. Let me explain, because so this is what Roe versus Wade says. The state cannot ban abortion before viability. It's a bright line rule. There's no question about this. And there's no federal court that has ever, since that decision, said, you know what a state can do? Ban abortion before viability. That's not an open question. So even if the conservatives on the Supreme Court were really confused by this enforcement mechanism, it doesn't matter. They know what their own precedent says. And a law that bans abortion at 6 weeks is in violation of their own precedent. They don't need to go through a procedural hurdle to figure anything out. This is a frontal attack. So by engaging in the game, by giving, credence to bad faith arguments, the conservatives on the court told us that the fix is in. They absolutely told us that. Okay. So we just need to say that. And anybody who's out there saying they didn't really overturn Roe versus Wade, no, now you know how to answer that. They did. But what can other folks challenge this? Yes. So at some point, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is going to have to let the underlying lawsuit take place. They may not like it, but it has to happen. And if they don't, then that is a full-on crisis in the federal courts. We don't get to pocket veto lawsuits that we don't like if we're a federal judge. That's just not how it goes, right?
Right.
So individual doctors, individual folks who are targets of this law can also bring their own challenge to it. Now, that doesn't help the state of Texas broadly. If I'm an abortion provider and I bring a lawsuit, I can get an injunction, I can get a ruling that protects me individually. But that doesn't protect everybody else who's in a similar spot than me. Those individuals then are forced to go into court on their own too. So one of the things that the Supreme Court did in this order is just make it onerous to challenge the law across the board. The other thing that's going to happen is the longer this law stays on the books, the more other conservatives in other states are going to point to it to say, see, this is reasonable. The public attitudes around abortion have shifted. And all we have to do is look to Texas that has this ban on its books that the courts have let take effect. For that, they have created an echo chamber where they are, they're ginning up the evidence and then their own factual conclusions and then being like, see, we told you.
Yeah. And isn't there also, go ahead, Eugene. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it just seems like it's also almost in a way, no matter what the outcome is, the longer it stretches on a huge attack on providers in the state of Texas. You can't just, if you have no clients coming in and it takes, a year, 6 months, 8 months, it seems like some of these places may have to close, may not be able to come back. Is that also a fear?
Absolutely. If you're a doctor, you have medical malpractice insurance, for example, right? You need to pay to keep, people need their jobs. This is providing abortion care is part of being an OBGYN. That's part of their, job. And so absolutely, it's designed to drive people out of practice. And the uncertainty, let's say the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals finally rules and the lower court proceeding happens and we get an injunction that blocks the law across the board. That's excellent news, but that also creates chaos. And folks need stability in order to just do our day-to-day lives. That's one of the things that we've learned really very acutely in COVID, right? That upheaval is really, it messes with a lot. And we saw that in Texas, right? They used the pandemic to shut down abortion access for a full month. So it's, there's a humanitarian crisis unfolding in the state, and there's really no other way to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a fear, because we know that many state legislators are controlled by Republicans and they've certainly redrawn many districts around the country so that they can continue to remain in control despite the fact that they may not actually have majority support in these states. But the fact remains that many state governments are in the hands of Republicans. Mm-hmm. This is a big issue for them. Is there a fear that this could be, because it was successful, at least temporarily, in Texas, that this could be replicated in other states around the country? And if
We know,
so,
yeah.
like, is there a plan against that at all?
We know it will be replicated. That's the one thing we know about the anti-choice movement, is that they don't keep things to one place, and particularly Texas. It is absolutely one of the states where they cook up their wildest, most outrageous attacks on reproductive autonomy. And, you know, not just abortion, some of the anti-trans stuff and, you know, all of that stuff is in the same soup. So to answer your question, yes. And immediately I would be looking to the other states that are within the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, because, you know, that's how the federal judiciary sort of builds its rhetorical power. So Mississippi and Louisiana are absolutely states that we should be worried about. Missouri, you know, Tennessee already has a 6-week ban that is set to take effect. It's being challenged, but there's nothing stopping lawmakers from coming back in and saying, you know, we're going to add this enforcement provision or to other bills that are happening. Because, and I mean, my inbox right now is flooded with messaging from the anti-choice community that is just, you know, crowing about this victory, about how they figured out this procedural way to, you know, really write a law that was insulated from legal challenge. And think about that. We have lawmakers who are like, we are so clever. We wrote a law that's so draconian, no court can ever block it. What?
So twisted.
Wow. I mean, it really just, I mean, it raises so many different questions. One question it raises for me is, where does this leave the Mississippi case? I believe the 15-week ban case that I think is in front of the Supreme Court. How does that fit in here?
That's an excellent question, because, you know, the Texas case was on the shadow docket, but the Supreme Court has a real live abortion fight on the merits on its actual docket. And so that's happening this term. They haven't scheduled oral arguments for that case yet. That's just a formality. It'll happen, I'm guessing, you know, sometime after Thanksgiving, going, you know, into January. So that the conservatives will hear arguments about that. And what we know more or less is how they will rule. They signaled everything in these last 2 days about how at least 5, but I'm going to say probably 6 justices rule in the Dobbs, the Mississippi 15-week ban case, and they will let that restriction take effect. They will let states ban abortion before viability, and they will use a different reasoning. Will they write an opinion that says Roe is fully overturned? No, because that would galvanize too many folks on the other side. What they will do is write an opinion that absolutely is such a functional carve out that abortion is legal in name only. Access is impossible if you are in a gerrymandered state, and evangelicals get the opportunity to, you know, fundraise off of the fact that, you know, the Supreme Court still didn't overturn Roe, right? Like we can see that, we know that. So the Dobbs case matters because that is the vehicle where the conservatives show their work. That is where the conservatives really make their case for why they are changing the law. And we know they're changing the law in this case. It takes 4 justices to agree to hear a case. It takes 5 justices to change the law. There was no underlying dispute going into this. They chose this case because they want to change the law.
You know, one question I have about this is, I mean, is there a potential legislative solution here as well? I mean, it does seem that, you know, there are no, I mean, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, part of the reason the Roe case even sort of came to the courts in the first place was the patchwork of state laws.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a federal legislative solution that people need to start thinking more, you know, concertedly about, recognizing that it does seem like there's just a lot of precarious pitfalls here in the legal system?
I mean, there's a lot of conversations about federal legislative responses. The Women's Health Protection Act, for example, could codify Roe. That would be the floor, right? That would leave things as they are right now. And if you talk to folks in Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas before this ruling, they're going to tell you things weren't really great for access for them beforehand. The issue, though, is the governing issue that Democrats have here, because absolutely there could be a federal response, but you got to govern to do that. And so are you getting a filibuster proof majority to support your legislation? And what are you doing about the courts? Because if you think that the Roberts Court is going to be open to federal legislation that enshrines and protects abortion access, I would love to have whatever you are drinking, because I just don't know what that is. And so these are the structural, infrastructure in terms of civics issues that progressives and Democrats have to tackle, because it's not just abortion rights. All of the issues that are absolutely intertwined with this are dead on arrival in this federal courts if the structure of the federal courts is not addressed.
Yeah. No, I mean, it seems like so many things. I mean, if the California recall goes the wrong way and Dianne Feinstein, who's I think nearly 90 years old, doesn't make it that long, and the next thing you know, you could have one of the furthest right anti-everything positive, really. You look at people like Larry Elder putting someone, in a position to block everything in terms of the Senate, in terms of replacements and other pieces. And it feels like a lot's hanging on a thread, and so it does sort of go back to maybe the core issue here, which is that advocacy is critically important at that moment, at this moment, because it seems that in sort of the institutions of power, there's so many different unknowns.
Absolutely. And, there are folks at state levels who are doing good work to protect abortion rights and access in their states. And for folks who are feeling disheartened right now or disempowered, really working to shore up locally what you can is a great place to put some of that emotion. Because, I'm in Colorado and we have 2 Democratic elected senators to DC, and they have said not much at all about what is happening right now. It's a no-brainer. And so with friends like that, I think it tells me, and what I tell folks is, really work on your local officials, on school boards, your state judges, district attorneys. All of those local races become extremely impossible. And talk to your friends and family. I have friends who are good progressive voters who had no idea that the Mississippi 15-week ban case was even happening. And I was like, I thought we were friends. Like, don't you listen to my show? Don't you read my work? Like, how do you not know this? But it's true, So, there's a lot happening on.
No, I hear you 100%. No, well, I really appreciate that. And one thing I do also let folks know where they can find the work that you all are doing at Rewire, which I think is absolutely critical to really actually be able to stay on top of this.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, over at Rewire News Group, I would say follow us on all our social platforms. That is where we are doing the bulk of our reporting and immediate analysis, because frankly, that's where folks are getting their information from. So we are meeting them where they're at. Over at Rewire News Group is our Twitter handle, and Amani Gandhi, who's Angry Black Lady, is leading the charge, and she's really been all over this from day one. I cannot lift up her work enough. She is just one of the leading voices in this space. And my brilliant co-host on the Boom Lawyered podcast, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Stitcher, all of those good places. But thank you so much for the opportunity to let folks know where to find our work. I appreciate it so much.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate you, Jessica, and I appreciate everything y'all are doing there at Rewire News Group. And I appreciate you giving us a little bit of time here on the Freedom Side.
Happy to. I'll come back anytime you need to talk about abortion in the courts.
Right on. Thanks so much.
All right.
Well, Rania, it's really, I always struggle, because I think if I say unbelievable, people are going to say, oh, Eugene, how do you think this is unbelievable?
No, but this is
but like, what do you say in these moments? It's ridiculous.
I mean, you say that the Texas governor is,
Greg Abbott, I believe has COVID right now, right?
I mean, I can't get over how, like, I know it's like everyone's already saying this and it's nothing new, but how can the same, it looks like my show. How can the same people who are like, vaccine mandates are too much, and like I'm putting something in my body, and masks are too much, be the same people who are like you can't get an abortion unless like it's 2 weeks after your missed period. Like, who are you? It's just I can't.
No, well, a couple super chats I just want to throw in real quick.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to lean forward to read. We're in the beta site here. Laug66, shout out to you. Thank you for your donation. Wish people would stop describing anti-abortionists as pro-life. I hear that 100%.
Yeah.
They're not pro-life. Also, great hair day on Breakthrough. Juan, very cool. Eugene is like his. So we're great minds think alike, they say. You do it yourself. Shout out to you as well. Rania, they are saying, I'm
I
not sure that your hair has changed. Not sure what you did. Perhaps a little bit of volume or
That
something
is
of that
very
nature.
observant. That is, I just want to say that is so observant. I let my hair air dry, and this is
Yeah.
how it looks if I don't use a blow dryer.
Yeah. Well,
So,
also want to shout
there
out
you go.
Matt. Yeah. Also want to shout out Matt. Harkening back to our conversation about the just tsunami of evictions facing people. His apartment complex just raised the rent by $200, which is BS. I agree. That's definitely BS. And I think
Not
a
cool.
huge shout out to you for giving us a little donation there. Really a big donation given that sort of circumstances and the circumstances you're in. So thank you so much for that. And completely ridiculous. And I think many, many, many more people are going to be seeing this exact situation as we move on. I mean, it really is just a truly, truly terrible situation all around. But like we heard, I mean, whether we're talking about women's rights, whether we're talking about, eviction defense, there are people fighting back in all of these areas very aggressively, day in and day out. And, you can also be one of these people. We're all subjects. We're not objects, right? We have the ability to act and to speak and to do something as opposed to, just allow ourselves to be acted on. And I think that is critically important. So Juan, I don't know, if you want to comment on your hair day, if there's anything more serious you wanted to mention, happy to have you weigh in here.
No, it's just crazy that this is the same Supreme Court that just said that the CDC can't have an eviction mandate, right? Like this is like they're saying, what was it that the right to exclude?
Yeah,
it's one of the most important rights for landowners, right? But they're infringing. But they're infringing on the rights of individuals, like what they want to do with their own body. Like it's ridiculous. And what they said, I saw a couple people in the comments that were saying that like the right wing doesn't cares about life until they're born, and then after that, what? Right? And Texas right now is in the death sentencing is legal, right?
Yeah. I mean, and
as a woman,
the DA has gone back on some of the not charging people in the death sentence. Anyway, sorry, that's a tangent. Go ahead, Ron.
Well, I was just gonna say, as a woman, the U.S. is such a messed up place because it's like, on the one hand, you want to force women to have children they didn't plan for or maybe can't care for or whatever their reason. It's none of your business. But let's be honest here. I mean, a lot of this is because of either lack of access to family planning or, a lot of women are in the tough position of like, I can't financially afford a child.
Yeah.
Which is, it's very expensive to have a child in America. Right. And it's just trying to reconcile the fact that you want to force people into a position where they have to pay for something they maybe can't afford, but then also deny them access to all the things that they can't afford for that child, like daycare. Yeah. I mean, you know how expensive it is to have a kid without health insurance in America? It's like $15,000, and that's if everything goes smoothly. That's not talking about if something goes wrong and you need a longer time at the hospital, which can, we've all seen the articles where a woman owes $1 million because she delivered a child prematurely, and then all the costs that come with that. I mean, it's just what a dystopian.
Well, to really throw you for a loop here, Rania, I saw that. I have to check this myself. I did see it on Twitter, and I looked at the shared images, and I do believe this is correct, but I'm open to correction. But the Texas law is actually more strict on abortion than Saudi Arabia.
So that's why I made
true?
The Taliban. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised because
you look like you might be contradicting me. So I'm glad to know that I'm telling the truth. I thought I was putting fake news out there, but I did see this online, and I just thought that kind of tells you everything right there.
No, this is like Christian that's I wasn't joking when I said Christian Taliban. It really is you've got the Texas government. That's what I was going to say. The Texas government, it's adopting Saddam Hussein style punishments for abortion. It's because I remember,
mask mandates.
It's insane. And then on top of all this, I think that this really should lead to a discussion of more reflection of the way that the pro-choice movement has gone about dealing with this, which has been, we just need to vote for Democrats. We just need to vote for Democrats. We just need to vote for Democrats. that'll protect our right to access to abortion.
Democrats who don't do anything.
Yeah.
But they not only do it, that's just aside from that they don't do anything, that has shown itself to be a complete failure as a strategy for maintaining access to abortion rights. Like, put aside all the issues of we dislike Democrats strongly, which we do on this show. That's aside from this as a strategy. And this is something that, friend of the show, Carl Bear, actually mentioned to me before we went live, because he wrote about it on his Substack. And I think he made a really good point is shout out to Carl. If you want to maintain access to abortion, you need to come up with strategies that are new and that work, because the one that we've been using for the last 30 years has clearly been a complete and utter failure. You cannot use getting the electorate to vote for Democrats as your main means of maintaining access to abortion. We have to find a better, more successful way, because it just hasn't worked.
Yeah. Well, I think on that note, that'll bring us to the close of our show. Really appreciate people sticking with us. Just want to give a huge shout out to the Breakthrough News team here that didn't give up. We found a way to keep going in the alternate site, in the beta site. We will be continuing to bring you this show, the Freedom Side, Thursday, 3 to 5, no matter what we have to power through here. And of course, you can always remember to always go to, there we go, patreon.com/breakthrough news. You can become a patron and support us. All of your patronage has done so much to push us forward here, and will continue to power us here on Breakthrough News. Of course, if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're not, go to YouTube. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the bell so that you can get the alerts about all the great things that we're putting out, including dispatches with Ron Nicolak, which we kind of look like right now. But nevertheless, really always a privilege to be here with everyone who's watching and everyone who's a part of it. And Rania, Juan, of course, always a pleasure to be here alongside you. And I think that'll do it for us here today.
Bye, guys.